The leather reins slipped through Helena Prescott's fingers like water as the chestnut mare beneath her let out a shriek that pierced the humid Missouri afternoon. And in that single heartbeat, she knew death was coming for her at 23 years old on a dusty road outside St. Louis in the summer of 1873. The horse reared up so violently that Helena's carefully pinned hat flew off, her dark auburn hair tumbling loose as she grabbed desperately for the saddle horn. The mare's eyes rolled white with terror, nostrils flaring as something in the brush, a rattlesnake perhaps, or maybe just a rabbit, had sent the normally docile animal into a blind panic. Helena had purchased the horse only 3 days ago from a dealer in town, assured that the mare was gentle enough for a woman traveling alone. Now, as the animal twisted beneath her with supernatural strength, she realized how catastrophically wrong that assessment had been. Her fingers found purchase on the saddle horn for just a moment before the mare bucked again, this time twisting sideways in a motion that defied nature. Helena felt herself lifting, weightless, the ground rushing up to meet her face. She had time to think of her mother back in Boston, of the letter she would never receive explaining why her daughter had come west, of all the dreams that would die with her on this lonely road. Then strong arms caught her mid-fall, yanking her sideways against a solid chest that smelled of leather and sage. A deep voice shouted something she could not quite hear over the blood rushing in her ears, and suddenly she was being pulled onto a different horse, this one steady as stone beneath them. The world spun as her rescuer maneuvered his mount with his knees alone, keeping one arm locked around her waist while his free hand shot out to grab her mare's trailing reins with a precision that spoke of years in the saddle. "Easy now, easy, girl," the man said, his voice dropping to a low, soothing rumble that somehow cut through the chaos. The spooked mare continued to dance and pull, but he held firm, letting the animal tire herself out while keeping Helena secure against him. She could feel his heart beating steady and slow against her back, such a contrast to her own rabbiting pulse that she wanted to weep with relief. It took several long minutes before the mare finally stilled, sides heaving, foam flecking her mouth. Only then did Helena's rescuer guide both horses off the main road and into the shade of a cluster of oak trees. He dismounted first, moving with a fluid grace that made it look effortless, then reached up to help her down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched solid ground, and his hands steadied her at the waist. "Thank you," Helena managed, her voice shaking more than she would have liked. "I thought I was going to die." "Not on my watch, miss." He stepped back, giving her space to collect herself, and for the first time she got a proper look at her rescuer. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and lean in the way of men who worked hard for their living. Dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck beneath a weathered brown hat, and his eyes were the color of whiskey in sunlight, warm and alert as they studied her with concern. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and dust coated his clothes, but there was something inherently trustworthy in his bearing. He looked to be perhaps 25 or 26, old enough to have lived some but young enough that life had not yet hardened him completely. "Russell Barrett," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "I run cattle about 10 miles north of here. Helena Prescott." She smoothed down her skirts with trembling hands, acutely aware of how disheveled she must look with her hair down and her dress rumpled. "I am in your debt, Mr. Barrett, truly." "Russell, please." He moved to examine her mare, running his hands down the animal's legs with practiced efficiency, checking for injuries. "She seemed sound enough, just scared. What spooked her, I do not know. One moment we were walking along peacefully, the next she went mad." Helena retrieved her fallen hat from where it had landed in the dirt, grimacing at the condition of the once fine accessory. Her aunt in Philadelphia had sent it to her only last month, before Helena had made the decision to leave Boston and everything she knew behind. Russell finished his examination and came back to her, his expression thoughtful. "You are not from around here." It was not quite a question, but Helena answered anyway. "Boston, originally. I arrived in St. Louis 2 weeks ago to take a position as a teacher at the new schoolhouse on Market Street." "That is ambitious, coming all this way alone." There was no judgment in his voice, only curiosity. "Where were you headed when your horse decided to put on a show?" "I was exploring the countryside. I wanted to understand the land and the people before I begin teaching the children here." She paused, then added more honestly, "And I needed to feel free for a little while." Boston was very confining. Something flickered in Russell's eyes, a recognition perhaps, as if he understood what it meant to need escape. "Well, exploring alone on an unreliable horse is a good way to end up vulture food. These roads might look peaceful, but there are dangers. Wild animals, rough characters passing through, storms that come up fast." He glanced at the sky, where clouds were beginning to gather in the west. "Speaking of which, we should get you back to town before the weather turns." "I can ride back myself," Helena said, though the thought of getting back on the mare made her stomach clench with fear. "You must have your own business to attend to." "I was heading into St. Louis anyway to pick up supplies. And besides, I would not sleep well tonight knowing I left you out here to face another spook alone." He smiled then, a slow, genuine expression that transformed his entire face and made Helena's heart do something strange in her chest. "Consider it payment for the entertainment." "I have never seen anyone hold on quite that long on a bucking horse before. You have got good instincts." Despite everything, Helena found herself smiling back. "I did not feel very skilled while I was falling through the air. But you grabbed for the saddle horn first, not just flailed around." "That is training talking, or at least good sense." He gathered both sets of reins and led the horses back toward the road. "Come on. We will take it slow, and I will keep your mare's reins tied to my saddle. If she spooks again, my gelding here will not budge. He is too stubborn and too old to care about much of anything anymore." The gelding in question, a massive bay with kind eyes, snorted as if in agreement. They rode back toward St. Louis at an easy walk, Russell keeping his promise to stay right beside her, the mare's reins secured to his saddle. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees lining the road, casting dappled shadows across the packed earth. Helena found herself relaxing despite her earlier terror, lulled by the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the surprising ease of Russell's company. "How long have you been ranching?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her natural reserve. "About 3 years now. I saved up enough working cattle drives to buy my own land, nothing fancy, but it is mine." Pride colored his voice, the kind that came from hard-won achievement. "I've got about 200 head now, mostly longhorns. The work is brutal and the profit margins are thin, but I wake up every morning working for myself, and that is worth more than gold." "I understand that feeling," Helena said softly. "That is why I left Boston. My father wanted me to marry a man twice my age who owned a shipping company. My mother wanted me to be content with tea parties and embroidery, but I wanted more. I wanted to matter, to do something useful with my life." Russell glanced at her with new appreciation. "Teaching is noble work. These children out here need good education if they are going to make something of themselves. Are you nervous about starting?" "Terrified," she admitted. "I have been trained to teach, but Boston children and frontier children are likely very different. What if they do not respect me?" What if I cannot manage a classroom full of boys who are probably better at roping and riding than any academic subject? Then you will figure it out, Russell said simply. Anyone brave enough to cross half a continent alone is brave enough to handle a few rowdy students. And besides, if you survived that horse, you can survive anything. The compliment warmed her more than it probably should have. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Helena found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. There was something solid about Russell Barrett, something steady and true that called to a part of her she had not known existed back in Boston's drawing rooms. He did not fill the air with empty chatter or try to impress her with boasts. He simply existed, confident in who he was, and she found it magnetic. "Do you have family?" she asked. A shadow crossed his face. "My parents died of fever when I was 16. I have got a younger sister, Rose, who lives in Kansas City with her husband. We write when we can, but the distance makes visits difficult." He adjusted his grip on the reins. "What about you? Your family must have been upset when you decided to leave." "My mother cried for 3 days. My father did not speak to me for a week before I left. They think I am throwing my life away, choosing hardship over comfort." Helena's throat tightened at the memory of that final, cold goodbye on the train platform. But they did not understand that staying would have been the real death. Dying slowly in a gilded cage, becoming nothing more than decoration in some man's house. That takes courage, walking away from everything you know. Russell's voice was gentle. "For what it is worth, I think you made the right choice." "Do you?" Helena looked at him directly, needing to see his face. "Truly, truly. This country needs people who are willing to take risks to build something new. You are going to do well here, Helena Prescott. I can feel it." The way he said her name, with such certainty and warmth, made her believe it might actually be true. They reached the outskirts of St. Louis as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The city had grown rapidly in recent years, transforming from a frontier outpost into a bustling hub of commerce and culture. Buildings of brick and stone lined the streets, and the levee along the Mississippi River teemed with steamboats and workers loading and unloading cargo. Russell escorted her all the way to the modest boarding house where she had taken a room, helping her dismount and then tying both horses to the hitching post out front. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had come to America with her husband 20 years ago and stayed after his death. She was strict but fair, and Helena had felt immediately at home under her roof. "Thank you again," Helena said, suddenly reluctant for this encounter to end. "You saved my life today." "Just happened to be in the right place at the right time." Russell looked down at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Though I am glad I was. Meeting you was the best part of my week." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and untied her mare's reins, handing them to her. "Get this horse checked out by a stable hand who knows what they are doing. If she spooks that easy, there might be something wrong, or maybe she was mistreated before you bought her." "I will." "And Russell," she paused, gathering her courage, "if you are ever in town again, perhaps we could have coffee. I owe you that much at least." His smile could have lit up the gathering dusk. "I would like that very much. I come to town most Saturday mornings for supplies." "Would this Saturday suit you?" "This Saturday would be perfect." She watched him ride away until he disappeared around the corner, then led her mare to the small stable behind the boarding house. Her hands were steady now, the terror of the afternoon fading into memory, replaced by something warmer and infinitely more dangerous. She barely knew Russell Barrett, yet she could not stop thinking about the feel of his arms around her, the absolute safety of being held against his chest while the world went mad around them. Mrs. Chen was waiting in the parlor when Helena entered through the back door, her dark eyes sharp with curiosity. "You are late. I was beginning to worry." "I had some trouble with my horse," Helena explained, sinking into one of the comfortable chairs. "But a kind rancher helped me. Everything is fine now." "A rancher?" Mrs. Chen set down her mending and gave Helena a knowing look. "This rancher has a name, Russell Barrett. He runs cattle north of the city." "Ah, I know of him. He comes to buy supplies from my nephew's store sometimes. Good man, honest, works hard." She paused. "Also handsome, unless I am mistaken." Heat flooded Helena's cheeks. "I had not particularly noticed." Mrs. Chen laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Of course you had not. And you are not meeting him for coffee on Saturday either, I suppose. How did you know about Saturday?" "I did not. You just told me." The older woman's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Be careful, Miss Prescott. The heart is a wild thing, and out here in the frontier it beats even more wildly. But if you must tumble into love, Barrett is a good choice. Better than most." Helena wanted to protest that she was not tumbling into anything, that it had been one afternoon and meant nothing. But the words would not come, because they would have been lies. Instead, she said good night and retreated to her small room on the second floor, where she spent far too long staring out the window at the darkening sky and remembering the sound of Russell's voice saying her name. Saturday arrived bright and clear, and Helena changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple blue cotton gown that brought out the color of her eyes. She twisted her hair into a neat bun, then took it down and arranged it in a softer style. By the time she descended the stairs, Mrs. Chen was shaking her head in amusement. "He will think you are beautiful no matter what you wear. Now go before you pace a hole in my floor." Russell was waiting outside the boarding house, leaning against the hitching post with the easy patience of someone used to long hours outdoors. He had cleaned up since their first meeting, his jaw freshly shaved and his shirt pressed, though he still wore the same weathered hat and boots. His face lit up when he saw her, and Helena felt that strange flutter in her chest again. "You are punctual," she said, trying to sound casual. "When I am meeting someone important, I am always on time." He offered his arm. "There is a good cafe on 3rd Street that makes coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Does that sound acceptable?" "Perfect." They walked through the morning streets of St. Louis, past shops opening their doors and vendors setting up carts of fresh produce and goods. Helena had spent most of her first 2 weeks exploring alone, and it felt entirely different to walk these streets with Russell beside her. People nodded greetings to him as they passed, and she noticed the respect in their eyes. He was known here, trusted. The cafe was small and clean, with checkered curtains in the windows and the rich aroma of coffee filling the air. They settled at a corner table, and a cheerful waitress brought them cups of coffee so strong it made Helena's eyes water on the first sip. "You are not exaggerating," she managed, and Russell laughed. "Out here, we do not have time for weak coffee. We have got work to do." They talked easily, the conversation flowing from one topic to another without awkward pauses. Russell told her about ranch life, about the challenges of building a herd and managing the land, about the satisfaction of watching calves grow strong and knowing his work mattered. Helena shared stories of Boston, of the suffocating social expectations and the quiet rebellion of reading forbidden books in her father's library, of the moment she had seen an advertisement for teachers willing to work on the frontier and known, instantly, that this was her chance at a real life. "I was so scared," she confessed, cradling her coffee cup between her hands. "The whole train ride west, I kept thinking I had made a terrible mistake, that I was too soft, too sheltered, too useless for this kind of life. And now I think maybe I was exactly right. Maybe this is where I was meant to be all along." She met his eyes across the table. "Though I will admit, nearly dying in my first week was not part of the plan. Life rarely goes according to plan. The trick is learning to adapt." Russell reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that sent sparks up her arm. "I am glad you are here, Helena. St. Louis is better for having you in it." She turned her hand over, letting their fingers intertwine. It was bold, probably improper, but she was tired of living by rules written by people who had never taken a real risk in their lives. "I am glad I am here too, especially if it means more mornings like this." They spent the next hour talking about everything and nothing, losing track of time until the cafe began filling with the lunch crowd. Russell walked her back to the boarding house slowly, as if reluctant for their time together to end. "I know it is sudden," he said as they paused outside the front door, "but I would very much like to see you again, not just for coffee but properly, courting if you would be amenable to that." Helena's heart leaped, but she forced herself to think clearly. "Russell, I need to be honest with you. My teaching position begins in 2 weeks, and it will be demanding. I cannot be some rancher's wife who stays home cooking and cleaning. I need to work. I need to matter." "I would never ask you to be anything other than who you are," he said firmly. "Your work is important. Your dreams are important. I am not looking for a housekeeper or decoration. I am looking for a partner, someone strong and brave enough to build a life out here. Someone exactly like you." The sincerity in his voice undid her. "Then yes, I would very much like to be courted by you, Russell Barrett." His smile could have powered the sun. "Then I will be back next Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and every Saturday until you get tired of seeing me. That might take a very long time. I certainly hope so." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth flooding through her entire body, then tipped his hat and walked back to where his horse waited. Helena watched him ride away, and this time when Mrs. Chen commented on her dreamy expression, she did not even try to deny it. The following weeks fell into a pattern that felt like magic. Russell came to town every Saturday, and they would spend the day together, walking along the Mississippi River levee, visiting the markets, or simply sitting in the shade of an old cottonwood tree and talking until the sun set. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, taught her how to identify different types of cattle, and listened with genuine interest as she talked about her preparations for teaching. Helena's school term began on a Monday morning in late August, and she arrived at the one-room schoolhouse on Market Street with her stomach in knots. 20 children ranging from ages 6 to 14 stared at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. The older boys in particular looked ready to test her, their arms crossed and their attitudes defiant. She took a deep breath and remembered Russell's words. "Anyone brave enough to cross half a continent alone is brave enough to handle a few rowdy students." "Good morning," she said, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Miss Prescott, and I am here to help you learn, not because someone says you must, but because education is the most powerful tool you will ever own. With it, you can become anything you want. Without it, your choices will always be limited." One of the older boys, a sturdy teenager with red hair, raised his hand. "What good is reading going to do me? I am going to ranch like my pa. Can you calculate profit margins on cattle sales? Can you read contracts so no one cheats you? Can you write letters to buyers in other states?" Helena met his eyes evenly. "Your father probably wishes he had more education. Be smarter than that. Be better prepared." She saw the moment he considered her words, the shift from resistance to grudging interest. By the end of that first day, exhausted but exhilarated, Helena knew she had won the battle. The students might not love every lesson, but they would respect her, and that was enough to start building something meaningful. When Saturday came, she could not wait to tell Russell everything. He listened with his full attention, asking questions and celebrating her victories as if they were his own. They were sitting by the river, the late summer sun warm on their shoulders, when he reached over and took her hand. "I am falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I know it has not been long, but I am certain you are everything I did not know I needed." Helena's breath caught. She should have been cautious, should have protected her heart, but she was tired of being careful. "I am falling in love with you too. It terrifies me how fast this is happening." "Does it have to be terrifying? Can it not just be wonderful?" She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Both. It can be both." He wrapped his arm around her, and they sat there watching the river flow past, the current strong and relentless, carrying them forward whether they were ready or not. As autumn painted the Missouri landscape in shades of gold and crimson, their relationship deepened. Russell invited Helena to visit his ranch, and she spent a Sunday afternoon learning about his operation, meeting his small crew of ranch hands, and marveling at the sheer amount of work required to keep everything running. He had built his house himself, a sturdy structure with a wide porch and windows facing east to catch the sunrise. "It is not fancy," he said, almost apologetically as he showed her around, "but it is solid." "It is wonderful," Helena said honestly. She could see the care in every detail, from the smooth floorboards to the stone fireplace he had mortared himself. "You built something real here, Russell, something lasting." "I want to build more," he said, turning to face her. "Not just the ranch, but a life, a family, a future." He took both her hands in his. "I know we should wait, court properly for a year or more like respectable people. But Helena, I have never been more certain of anything. Marry me, be my wife. Teach your students and change the world and come home to me every evening so I can hear about it." She should have asked for time to think, should have been practical and cautious. But standing in his house, his home, feeling the weight of his love and trust, she knew her answer. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise, and Helena felt everything click into place. This was right. This was home. They married on a crisp October afternoon in a small church on the edge of St. Louis, with Mrs. Chen and a handful of Russell's ranch hands as witnesses. Helena wore a simple ivory dress she had made herself, with wildflowers in her hair, and Russell looked handsomer than any man had a right to in his Sunday best. The ceremony was brief, but when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Helena felt the words echo through her entire being. She kept her teaching position, much to the surprise of some townspeople who believed married women should stay home. But Russell stood firm beside her, telling anyone who questioned it that his wife was doing important work and he would not ask her to stop. Helena taught during the week and managed the ranch books in the evenings, her education making quick work of the accounting Russell had always struggled with. They fell into an easy partnership, each supporting the other's dreams while building their own together. Russell taught Helena to ride properly, patient and encouraging until she could gallop across the prairie without fear. She taught him to read better, expanding his education beyond the basics until he could lose himself in books the way she did. On Saturday evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they called home, and talk about everything and nothing. The first winter was hard. Bitter cold descended in December, and Russell worked himself nearly to exhaustion keeping the cattle alive through several brutal storms. Helena would wake before dawn to make hot coffee and hearty breakfasts, then spend her days teaching before coming home to help with whatever she could. There were nights she fell into bed so tired she could barely move, but Russell was always there, his arms around her, his presence a constant source of strength. "We are going to make it," he would whisper into her hair. "Together we can weather anything." And they did. The cattle survived, spring came, and the ranch grew stronger. In late March, Helena realized she was pregnant. She told Russell on a Sunday morning as they worked together mending a fence, and he dropped his hammer in shock before sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." "In October, I think," Helena said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Which means I can finish the school term before I need to take time away." She worked until late September, when the weight of the baby made standing for long hours too difficult. The school board agreed to hire a temporary teacher for the months she would be away, with the understanding that her position would be waiting when she was ready to return. Helena spent the final weeks before the birth preparing the small nursery Russell had built onto their house, sewing tiny gowns and imagining the life growing inside her. Their son was born on a cold night in late October, arriving in a rush after only a few hours of labor. Russell held her hand through it all, his face pale but his presence unwavering. When the midwife placed the squalling infant in Helena's arms, both she and Russell wept. "What should we name him?" Russell asked, his finger tracing the baby's tiny hand. "William," Helena said softly. "William Barrett, after your father." Russell kissed her forehead, unable to speak for the emotion clogging his throat. William was a healthy, happy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Helena took 6 months away from teaching, and though she loved her son fiercely, she also missed the classroom and her students. When she returned to work in the spring, they hired a young woman from town to help with William during the day, and it worked beautifully. Helena taught, Russell ranched, and in the evenings they came together as a family, exhausted and happy and whole. The years flowed past like the Mississippi River, steady and strong. William grew into a bright, curious boy who loved both books and horses, trailing after his father around the ranch and then sitting with his mother in the evenings as she read to him. When he was 4, Helena gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Alice, who filled the house with noise and laughter. Russell's ranch continued to prosper. What had started as 200 head of cattle grew to 500, then 800. He hired more hands, built a larger barn, and earned a reputation throughout Missouri as a fair employer and skilled cattleman. Helena's reputation as a teacher grew as well. Her students consistently performed better than those in neighboring towns, and several went on to attend university, a rarity for children from frontier families. On a warm evening in the summer of 1882, nearly 9 years after that day on the road when Helena's horse had spooked, they sat together on their porch watching their children play in the yard. William, now 8, was teaching his little sisters how to braid rope, his patience with them a mirror of Russell's patience with him. "You ever regret it?" Russell asked, his arm around Helena's shoulders. "Leaving Boston, coming out here, choosing this life?" Helena leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of sage and sun and home. "Not for a single moment. This life we have built, this family, it is everything I did not know I needed. That day my horse spooked, I thought I was going to die. But instead I found out how to truly live. I was just a cowboy in the right place at the right time. You were everything. You are everything." She tilted her face up to kiss him, soft and sweet. "You saved me in more ways than one, Russell Barrett." "We saved each other," he corrected, pulling her close. And we are going to keep saving each other for the next 50 years. Only 50. Well, maybe 60. I am feeling optimistic. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the prairie to where their children played. Inside the house, Helena's books lined the shelves beside Russell's ranching journals. The table was scarred from years of family dinners, and photographs of their growing family decorated the walls. It was not a fancy life by Boston standards, but it was rich beyond measure in everything that mattered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Helena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had left behind comfort and security, rejected the safe path, and risked everything on the slim chance that she might find something more. That risk had led to a spooked horse and a cowboy with whiskey-colored eyes and a heart big enough to hold all her dreams. "I love you," she whispered into the gathering dusk. "I love you too," Russell whispered back. "Until the stars fall and beyond." Their children called for them then, William needing help with a knot, and the twins demanding a story before bed. They rose together, hand in hand, and walked inside to the warm, chaotic, perfectly imperfect life they had created. Behind them, the Missouri prairie stretched out vast and endless under the darkening sky, the same land that had witnessed their beginning now cradling there forever. Years later, when Helena was in her 50s and her hair had threads of silver running through it, she would sometimes tell the story to her grandchildren about the day she thought a spooked horse would be the end of her. She would describe the terror of falling, the certainty of death, and then the miracle of strong arms catching her mid-flight. She would tell them how one moment of disaster had transformed into a lifetime of love, how the cowboy who saved her that day had gone on to save her in 1,000 other ways through the years. But on this evening in 1882, with the future still unwritten and their children young, Helena and Russell simply held each other close and watched the stars emerge one by one overhead. They had survived brutal winters and scorching summers, financial hardships and personal losses. They had built a ranch, raised children, and carved out a place in this wild frontier that was entirely their own. The spooked horse that should have killed Helena had instead delivered her straight into Russell's arms and the life she was meant to live. It was strange how fate worked sometimes, how near tragedy could pivot into perfect joy. She thought of herself at 23, terrified and falling, certain the ground would break her. She wished she could go back and tell that frightened girl that she was not falling to her death but rising into her life, that the man reaching for her would become her everything, that the Wild West she had been so afraid of would become home. But time only moved forward, and Helena was grateful for every moment that had brought her here. Russell's hand tightened around hers as if he could read her thoughts, and she squeezed back, a silent conversation of love and gratitude passing between them without words. Inside the house, the clock struck 8, and the twins protested loudly about bedtime while William tried to negotiate for just 10 more minutes outside. Helena and Russell shared a knowing look, the kind only long-married couples could exchange, and went in together to wrangle their children toward sleep. Later, much later, when the house was finally quiet and the children tucked into their beds, Helena and Russell lay together in the darkness of their room. The window was open to let in the cool night air, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled its lonely song to the moon. "Tell me about tomorrow," Helena whispered, a game they had played since the early days of their marriage. "Tomorrow I am riding out to the north pasture to check the fence line," Russell said, his voice low and warm in the darkness. "And you are teaching the children about geography. And in the evening we are going to have dinner together, all 5 of us, and probably at least one of the twins will spill something. Probably Alice. She is the wild one. She gets that from you. Helena laughed softly. I am not wild. You crossed a continent alone to escape a life you did not want. You rode a spooked horse longer than any greenhorn had a right to. You married a cowboy your parents never even met. Helena Barrett, you are the wildest woman I know, and I have never loved you more. She turned into him, finding his mouth in the darkness, kissing him with all the passion and tenderness of 9 years together and a lifetime still ahead. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, she rested her forehead against his. And the day after tomorrow, she asked. We do it all again, Russell said simply, and again after that, every day building our life together one sunrise at a time. That sounds perfect. It is. We are. And they were. In a world that could be harsh and unforgiving, they had found each other and created something beautiful. The ranch would continue to grow. The children would mature and eventually have families of their own. And Helena and Russell would age together, their love deepening and strengthening with each passing year. But the foundation of it all, the moment everything changed, remained that afternoon in 1873, when a spooked horse threw a Boston schoolteacher into the arms of a Missouri cowboy. 1 second of terror, 1 instant of rescue, and both their lives had pivoted into something neither could have imagined but both desperately needed. As sleep finally claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms in the house they had built together, Helena's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude. She had come west looking for freedom and purpose, and she had found those things. But more importantly, she had found Russell, and in finding him, she had found herself, the truest, strongest, happiest version of herself that could only exist here in this place with this man. The Missouri night settled over their ranch like a blanket, stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, the land breathing slow and deep around them. And in the house on the hill, the Barrett family slept peacefully, safe and loved and home at last.